This morning to welcome from the Labour Party, Grant Robertson, from New Zealand First, Tracy Martin, from the Greens, Gary Hughes, and from the Māori Party policy team, Jackie Potu, ex-president of Te Mana Whakaunga, just saying, Grant, ex-president of NZUSA and Otago. We're going to have a panel discussion today. Each of the party representatives are going to talk a little bit about policy direction over the next few years, particularly moving into election year, alongside the challenges and opportunities that are facing the tertiary sector, so that we'll be able to take those things into account as we move through the next couple of days of planning the future of NZUSA. And then we'll have time to take questions and answers from the floor, and hopefully open up a bit of discussion between everyone. So welcome to our esteemed panellists. We'll start moving from left to right, and so we'll crack right into it. We want to be finished by midday, so I'd say 5 to 10 minutes.
So I'll take about 40. Kia ora, ngā mihi nui ki koutou katoa. Thank you very much for having me here today. You might be able to hear my voice is a little on the croaky side. I'm not feeling the best today, so my apologies for that, but nothing will stop me from addressing an NZUSA conference, one of many that I've done, and I always enjoy coming and speaking with NZUSA. I think that the work you do is really important. I won't divert for very long onto organisational issues, except to say that both as a former president and also as somebody who's been involved in the tertiary sector for 25 odd years now, off and on, what NZUSA does as a national peak body is enormously important, as with Te Mana Whakaunga and its other incarnations. It is really, really important that students have a voice at a national level, and so from the perspective of any constituent organisations pondering their futures, which is a perpetual thing in NZUSA, I might say, I just put that on the table. Look, I'm keen to get some discussion going. I'm going to talk about 3 big picture things and 2 or 3 more practical things. We were just standing outside, and I know you had Stephen Joyce here last night. I'm sorry to have missed him. Apparently he was, well, because essentially it would have been a chance for us to actually get him to answer some questions, because we have a little bit of difficulty getting him to do that as well. But I think when you look at what National's done in terms of tertiary education, it was 5 years ago yesterday that the National Government was first elected in 2008. And if you look across that 5-year period as to what National has done, it has been a series of systematic cuts and undermining of the value of tertiary education. And Stephen Joyce is a cleverer politician than some of the 1990s equivalent of him, and so he has done that in small bits. So when I was a student in the early 1990s, Ruth Richardson came along with a budget that wiped out student allowances, that introduced a huge range of fees. It was a catastrophe all in one hit, and students were hugely motivated around that. This has been a series of small undermining cuts, but what lies at the heart of it is a very, very different view of tertiary education than the one that I have, that I suspect many of you have. And that is a lack of belief in the fact that tertiary education is a public good, that it is actually something that is good for society as a whole. There's obviously private benefit from tertiary education, and there's no point in denying that, but as such, for society, we need more people doing tertiary education. We need more people undertaking training and study beyond their compulsory school years. It is the only way our society will improve its economy and improve the inclusiveness of what we do. So it is a public good. Stephen Joyce doesn't believe that, in my view. I'd love him to actually stand up and answer a question about that. But what we've seen is a predictable, I think, and systemic move away from that. The second area is around the nature of the sector. And from a Labour Party point of view and my point of view, the big change that we want to see is move to a more collaborative sector. And what's happened, and I'll put my hand up and say this took place under Labour as well in the last time we were in government, was more of a move to a competitive sector. And that's actually pointless. We're a small country. There's not actually that many of us. Having huge competition among institutions doesn't take us very far at all. There's always going to be a bit of dynamism between institutions. One department will think it's better than another in a university or across a polytech or whatever. But actually having that as the core of part of the system, the competitive model, I think damages the educational experience that students have. I think it wastes a huge amount of money. And I'm sure annually NZUSA will do what people have always done, which is find out how much money the institutions spend on marketing themselves to domestic students. And it's a criminal amount of money. It'll be in the $30–40 million range now. Per year, and that is an absolute waste of money. But overall, there's a philosophy that lies behind that competitive model that I don't think is that useful in a country like New Zealand. And the third kind of big picture thing where I see a big difference between what Stephen Joyce and National are doing and what I would like to do is around where the investment of the government will go. And I saw in the paper that Auckland Uni is reducing the number of arts courses that it will be offering next year. You can bet your bottom dollar that part of the deal with Canterbury around the rebuild will be that there'll be more of a focus around science and engineering. And look, we need more scientists and we need more engineers in New Zealand, but we also need people studying other kinds of courses. And I get really distressed when I see the move that I do think Stephen Joyce is driving, which is to commodify tertiary education, to not see the wider societal benefits of it. And I'd like to bring us back to that and get that balance back into the funding. So they're kind of three biggish picture things that I think would be different, that we would approach differently as a Labour government, and where I think Nationals are going wrong. In terms of more practical things, where to start? The tertiary education strategy is out, and I'm sure a lot of you will have seen it. You look at the goals in it, and you think, these are all right. We all want more participation by Māori and Pacifica students. We all want to see adult literacy outcomes improve, absolutely. I don't have a problem with international education. I think it's an important part of creating a good, strong, robust, diverse system. But what's missing from the tertiary education strategy is a statement about what it is all about. Why are we doing it? How are we going to improve quality? How are we going to improve access? It's not there. And it's a shocking gap and a very clear direction from the government. So, the submission's on that close next week, I think. And if you haven't put one in, I'd really encourage you to put one in, because this is the document that will guide the way the government looks at tertiary education for the next year until we vote them out. But it is a real sign of where they're going. The other areas, obviously, that disturb me greatly are the chipping away at support for students. I've said it at last year's conference, I think, or the year before's conference, that I think the cutting of allowances for postgraduate students is one of the stupidest things I've seen in 25 years in tertiary education. I've seen a lot of stupid things. But you put that alongside the changes around over 40s access to allowances, you put that alongside stopping over 55-year-olds getting the living cost of the student loan. It is a chipping away of access, it's limiting people's participation, and it's deliberate. And Stephen Joyce, in the very first meeting I ever went to with him when he became Tertiary Minister, and they were talking about the cuts to allowances, and he said the purpose was to dampen demand for tertiary education. What dampen demand means is stop people from going on to tertiary education and fulfilling their potential. And I just think that's wrong. Labour, when we were last in government, greatly expanded the access of people to student allowances, and that's what Stephen Joyce complains about when he gets up and he says, like, hundreds of millions of dollars was spent. Well, yes, it was, because it was actually about giving people the opportunity to go and study. So I want to see us get back to that, to ensure that we actually give people opportunities. My own view is that the entire loan and allowance system needs to be reviewed. I think we've reached a point now, basically 20 years on from when the loan system was created, that so many things have been tacked on, changed, added, that it's now complete confusion. And I'll finish in a sec, Pete. That one of the main topics of letters that I got when the last round of cuts to student allowances took place, this was around postgrad, was actually from parents and students complaining about the fact that there were others who were still getting access to allowances because they could structure their family's affairs in such a way as if to appear that they have no income when they're actually very wealthy. And that unfairness has now been built into the system, and we've got to do something about that. So I want to see a big review. The end point of the review is to increase access to tertiary education. I'd like to see more people getting access to allowances. and reducing the burden of debt. So that's kind of three practical things. There's a whole lot of other stuff. All the governance changes, which I think are horrendous, and they are aimed at taking the student voice out of tertiary education. It's been done to politics already. It's now on the way for universities. VSM is the other part of that equation for the government, and it is very, very deliberate to reduce your influence, and it must be fought against and turned around.